Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky, and this is Sam. It is a privilege to serve as your host for this evening's program with our brother and fellow evolution dismantler, Russ Miller, on a program that focuses on debunking the most common lines of evidence for evolution, but really focusing on the top 10 Darwinian frauds. And so I'm excited for this. Sam, my award-winning co-host, great to have you, brother. And how you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited about tonight. I'm excited to hear what Brother Miller has for us tonight.
Amen. And if anyone's wondering, evolution, well, we don't disagree with change over time. Well, we're talking about that kind of evolution, Russ, that says all life, including humans and banana plants, are related through common ancestry. So, Russ, it's great to have you back here. It's been a few years, as a matter of fact. Time flies by when you're having fun upholding the truth of biblical creation. So, Russ, how have you been, and how's your summer coming along?
Well, I've been good. Our summer has been busy. Been filling in for one pastor who's been on sabbatical for the last 4 Sundays, and just been God's been opening doors. I do some Grand Canyon tours. I fill in and speak at other churches. So we've been keeping pretty busy, but at a nice pace. How about you guys?
It's been good. It's been busy. Same thing. Defending creation, doing our best to uphold the truth, Sam, and encounter the critics. You mentioned the Grand Canyon tour. I think that'd be cool. I'm here in Canada, so it's just one Canadian hanging out with a couple Americans. One day, Sam and I will have to take one of those tours. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
It would be.
Absolutely. That'd be a lot of fun to have you on one of the trips with us.
Well, Brother Russ, I've got your website here linked for people to check out. You have a ton of material. And so I want to encourage people to check out creationministries.org. I've also got linked in the description your website, and also a link to where they can read more about you and your history. Actually, Russ, before we get into your talk, for anybody that might be new to this channel, new to the creation versus evolution debate, and new to your ministry, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey, and then also your ministry itself?
Well, I guess in a nutshell, I went to college, drifted away from the faith like a lot of college kids do. I was playing college sports at the time, and got out of college, met my wife, who was very involved in her church, and I started getting back into church. And the more I went, the more important God showed me it was. He slowly called me back. He was good, and I guess patient with me. And I can't really say when the moment was I was saved. Before that, I was raised in a Christian home, but for sure I accepted Christ in my late 20s, got rebaptized, and had a nationwide business. I was going to retire at the age of 49, but at the age of 40, and then I have 174 college credits. So all I've ever been taught through school, of course, was millions of years leading to Darwinian evolutionism. And I just figured God must have somehow used evolution in long ages of time. And God was patient with me, but he finally showed me some information that just totally refuted Darwinism. And he used that as a springboard to really light a fire under me. I studied the issues very intently from the age of 40 to 44. And at the age of 44, instead of retiring at the age of 49, at the age of 44, I gave my business away to a fellow who'd worked for me for 13 years, went into the ministry cold turkey. And that's what I've been doing for 26 years now. And I feel that this is what God called me to do. He set me up so I could do it. And we just try to be true to his word and follow his lead. Stand up for God's word, contend for the faith, as we're told in Jude 3. And help people who are lost, or people who are on the wrong track because of false teachings, false science, false knowledge, of which there's a lot out there. And the message we're going to go through tonight, the top 10 Darwinian frauds, is information that literally has misled not millions, billions of people. And it is just so easy to destroy Darwinism, as you guys know. But I thought that would be a good one for us to start with. I think in the future we'll take on the age of the earth issues, which as Christians we also win. As I always tell people, we own the true science, but the other side owns the system, and that's where the breakdown is. So I know you guys do a lot of debates with atheists and such, and that's a great way to show people that these guys don't have the truth on their side. But showing some of the Darwinian frauds, I think, will help some folks that see this.
Amen. Praise the Lord. I love your journey. And I'm looking forward to this program on the top 10 Darwinian frauds. I know you have a lot to present and put on the table as we set the foundation for a series here. As you put it, we'll be back here next month. So for those in the audience, today focusing on Darwinism or neo-Darwinism, as some evolutionists would refer to it as. And then next month, we'll focus on the age of the earth and show you that the Bible teaches a global, not local, Genesis flood, and really kind of dig deep into the scriptures and the science of that issue. So, Russ, I think we're good to go. Top 10 Darwinian frauds. We have a lot to cover to the audience. We're doing this live for many reasons. We want to give you the opportunity to send in your questions, your challenges, your objections, questions of clarification. If you're a fellow creationist, I'll do my best to save those alongside with Sam. Sam and I'm sure we'll have our own questions as well. And so once Russ has done his talk, we'll engage in some discussion. Russ, I am going to get your slides up, brother, and the floor is yours. Take as much time as you need.
Okay, well, Sam and Donnie, thank you. I'll start going through this. If you guys have any comments that you want to bring in, feel free to do so. And otherwise, I'll just keep going through what I call my message, the top 10 Darwinian frauds in the text box. I'm going to start out with Romans 1, verses 22 and 23, where we're told that professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Now, this isn't saying someone is stupid. No, it's saying they've just been fooled. I know some brilliant people that have been fooled and believe in Darwinian, which is also known as macroevolution. It's not a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of the fact that they have been fooled like I had once been. And they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God, which I think today is his creation, into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Well, it sounds to me like they're going to change creation into the fairy tale of Darwinian evolution. Now, these verses are talking about idolatry. And the highest form of idolatry is to think you're the most evolved, you're your own God. We call that humanism today. And humanists own the system, and they teach their religious belief in the place of actual science. And this has misled not millions, but billions of people. In fact, Pew and Barna Research have reported that anywhere from 70 to 90% of the Christian-raised kids leave the church by the age of 20. They report that one of the largest growing religious sects in America are former Christians. And when they ask these folks that have lost their faith, what were the main reasons? Some of the top reasons are thinking that Darwinian evolution is true, thinking that Christians are anti-science, and thinking there's no evidence of biblical creation or the global flood. Well, we're going to cover a lot of that tonight in this message. We'll talk about the global flood and the age of the earth issues in the next message. But, first, I think it's very important for people to understand that the word science has different meanings. And there are two that are key in this issue. There's operational science and historical science. Now, when we hear something that's presented to us in a science book or a science journal, or even in a magazine or in the news, anytime we're presented something as if it were science, we assume it's a proven fact. Now, that would be operational science. Now, those listening, hey, you may never have heard of the term operational science. You may never have heard of its definition. But when you hear something presented as science, you assume it's a proven fact. And that's where we get misled, because there's also historical science. Operational science is best defined as knowledge that has been derived from the observation and testing of evidence. You have evidence, you test it over and over and over and over again, you get the same results, it becomes a scientific fact. And that's operational science. Operational science is a believer's best friend. Most folks don't realize it today, but more than 80% of the 200 or so branches of modern science were started by Christians to study God's creation. There wouldn't even be science if it weren't for Christianity. We thought there's an intelligent creator in place. He probably put some laws and forms, programs in place that we could find and discover if we would test his creation. They call it nature today. Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist of all time. Francis Bacon, the father of the scientific method. Over 80% of the branches of science started by Christians. Real science has always been and is today a believer's best friend. However, in 2 Peter 3:3-4, we are warned, we are told, there shall come in the last days scoffers, non-believers. And they're going to say that things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. This is a process known as uniformity. They're going to claim processes we see today have always been pretty much the same. So they'll look at the amount of silt being taken out of the Grand Canyon by the Colorado River, and they'll say it's always been pretty much the same, and the canyon's this big. It took millions of years for that river to carve out Grand Canyon. Well, we'll talk about Grand Canyon when we talk about age of the earth issues, but I've led tours through Grand Canyon for 20-something years. I've rafted the entire length 13 times. The Colorado River had nothing to do with the original formation of the canyon. It entered the already formed canyon, but we'll talk about that in a couple of more weeks. But these non-believers in the last days are going to claim uniform processes, and that leads us to historical science, which is not science at all. But please let this sink in. Roughly half of everything we have ever been taught as science has actually been historical science. Now, historical science, remember, operational science, real science, a Christian's best friend, real science is knowledge derived from the study of evidence. Historical science are explanations of non-observable events that took place in the non-observable past. There was nothing observed about these historical narratives. Historical science is not science at all. So historical narratives, explanations, in other words, a story to explain non-observed events from the non-observed past. Well, since humanists and secularists, basically atheists, have owned the system now for 75 years, all of their narratives are going to fit their secular or atheistic bias. So it's historical narratives where there's controversy between what the Bible says and what masquerades as science. So real science is a Christian's best friend, but these historical narratives, of which about half of everything we've been taught is science, they're actually these biased narratives masquerading as science, and that's where controversy is found. Let me provide a simple example of the different results you get between real operational science based on observation and never observed historical narratives. If you've ever seen oil drain from a car, they pull out the plug in the pan and boosh, oil pours into the bottom of the pan. Well, you can do that over and over and over and over again and observe it and time it. And you're going to conclude it takes about 2 minutes to fill that pan with oil. But let's say you've never seen that, and you come along 5 minutes later, you observe the full pan of oil. Well, you want to know how long did it take to fill that pan with oil? Well, based on your belief in uniformity, you watch it for 3 days, 5 days, an entire week, and after 7 full days, 1 drop of oil falls from the car into the pan below. Well, based on your belief in uniformity, it's always been 1 drop per week. Historical narratives claim it took 2,000 years to fill that pan with oil, and they would be absolutely wrong. And that's just a simple example of the difference between real operational science, a believer's best friend, and historical narratives based on a belief in uniformity, which have never been observed and have the atheistic or humanistic bias. And that is where controversy is found between what the Bible says and what masquerades as science. Anytime there's a controversy between what you're being told is science and what the Bible says, take a step back and ask yourself, did anyone actually see, test, study, and observe this take place? Or is that a historical narrative, a story, a fairy tale? And you're going to find every single time you're thinking, wait, yeah, nobody saw that. That's just a story I'm being told. No wonder in 1 Timothy 6, we're told to avoid oppositions of science falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Now, that word science is better translated knowledge. So watch out for oppositions of false knowledge being pushed as if they were scientific facts, and they're always historical narratives. In fact, think about what this former Harvard biology professor and outspoken atheist admitted. He said evolutionary biology, Darwinian biology, in contrast with physics and chemistry, which are hard operational sciences, he said evolutionary biology is a what? Historical science. It's a story. It's a great big story. He said one constructs a historical narrative that led to the events. They see a human with a torso and a head on top and 2 arms and 2 legs, and they see a monkey or an ape with a torso and a head on top and 2 arms and 2 legs, and they made up this story of how one changed into the other. It's a great big historical narrative. And it's these historical narratives that have misled so many people. So we're going to go through some of the top historical narratives of Darwinian biased biology. The Bible says in Jeremiah, this was given to the ancient Israelites, that people would turn their back on God, saying to a stone, "Thou hast brought me forth." Well, we wouldn't tell anyone today that we came from a stone, right? Well, let's go to the modern textbooks. Step into your imaginary time machine and push a few buttons. So this sound like science coming at you? And notice your imaginary time. And then below it says, Earth is thought, believed, nobody saw this, to have formed 4.6 billion years ago. And scientists theorize, make up a story that Earth started out as a hot ball of rock. None of that's observed. That's all historical narratives, a great big fairy tale. And then oceans formed as it rained on the stone for millions of years. And yes, they're teaching that poof, we came from a stone, a wet stone, but a stone nonetheless. No wonder in Colossians 2:8 we're warned, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, and not after Christ. And there's really only 2 viable philosophies out there. Either God created the world just like he says he did, or the world evolved on its own, like secular atheists teach in their historical narratives. Now, I live near Sedona, Arizona, and we do have that group that says, well, maybe we're not here at all. Maybe we just think we're here, but we really are here. So I don't pay a lot of attention to that group. 1 Thessalonians tells us to prove all things and hold fast that which is good. So I think we should follow the word of God and do just that. Let's look at the top 10 historical narratives, frauds of Darwinian evolution. I'm not going to read through this list right now because we're just about to go right through them. First, let's go with narrative number 1, that life came from non-life. Darwin supposed that perhaps life started in a little warm pond. Others have said maybe a lightning strike started life, because we see lightning strikes start life all the time, right? Basically what they're talking about there is spontaneous generation. That was refuted years and years ago. So now today they teach a biogenesis. Now it's a fancy word, but basically it's just spread out spontaneous generation, where they say chemicals came together over long ages of time, and that's how life started. Well, somewhere you still had to have non-life become life. Poof, that spontaneous generation moment. This has never been observed. It's not even a good historical narrative. Because in real science, a believer's best friend, we have the law of biogenesis, that life only comes from life. You can't get non-life to produce life. You can't have a wet, sterile rock and get life started. That's basically the end of Darwinism right there. But we have a lot of frauds to go through. So let's keep moving ahead. They're going to try to fool people into thinking that scientists in labs have created life from non-life, but actually they've never come close to producing life, even in a laboratory. The famous Russ Miller experiment and millions of copycat experiments afterwards have all failed to come up with life. They came up with some non-living chemical compounds, amino acids, that are found in life, but it would be like you and I creating calcium and saying, hey, calcium exists in humans, we've created a human being. They've come nowhere near creating life in a lab. The law of biogenesis has never been known to have been overcome. So if we think about it logically, the world's brightest scientific minds, building on years and years of other scientists' research with billions of dollars of lab equipment and computers thrown in and salaries. They can't get non-living matter to produce life, but we're supposed to believe that rocks and seawater did it on their own. Oh, but wait, not today when you could test, study, and observe it. No, long ago and far away. That's a fairy tale. If they just start out once upon a time, I wouldn't have a problem with it. They could put it in a child's fairy tale book instead of a kid's grade book in 1st through 12th grade. You know, this Eugenie Scott was president of the National Center of Science Education and an outspoken atheist, so you know where she's coming from. And I spoke so many times at Northern Arizona University's Klein Auditorium that after one biology teacher came to the top frauds, ended up quitting her job and becoming a Christian, they actually started an accredited course attacking me on biblical creation. They ran for several years, and they used her book, Evolution versus Creationism. You can see the bias in the title there. And so I said, let's go to that book and see how they explain how life started without God. And on page 26, the modern explanation was this: the origin of life was a continuum of events, a biogenesis, with a lot of iffy stuff in the middle. That's the modern college explanation. Do you think maybe they don't know what they're talking about? This former Harvard professor and Nobel Prize winner stated, modern biologists, having reviewed the downfall of spontaneous generation, yet unwilling to accept creation, are left with nothing, although they do have the iffy stuff. So historical narrative number 2 is that life began as a simple cell. You've probably heard the term simple cell. Well, the more and more we get into the cell, the more and more complex it becomes. I think right now, I think it's fair to say it's way beyond human comprehension. The genetic information, the way it works, the molecular motors, on and on it goes. The simple cell, there's no such thing as a simple cell. Yet this book tells kids simple molecules from the atmosphere. I guess they just floated in. But it says all the many forms of life on Earth today are descended, stated as a fact, from a common ancestor found in a population of primitive unicellular organisms. Now, how's a kid supposed to argue with that? You assume that's a proven fact, right? Well, what evidence do they have? Well, it says right here at the bottom, no traces of those events remain. No traces remain? That's just a great big fairy tale, a historical narrative. I thought science was knowledge derived from the study of the evidence. If there's no evidence, it's a fairy tale. It's not science. Just to talk about a cell for a moment, the bacterial flagellum biochemistry has found that bacteria cells are run by tiny molecular motors called bacterial flagellum. Now, the motor allows the cell to swim around and perform its functions. It can even change gears depending on how much weight it's towing or pushing. Now, it's made up of 40 different very specific proteins that have to be in the exact order at the exact moment for life to start. It's known as irreducibly complex. If one piece is missing or in the wrong order, it would never start. So they have to have that there from the start to get life to function, to even get life started. And worse for the fairy tale of Darwinian evolution, it takes other molecular motors that also are irreducibly complex to put that flagellum together. So there are hundreds and hundreds of molecular motors inside of a cell that all had to be there at the start. This is the reason real science, a believer's best friends, has things like the law of biogenesis. And this is why Darwinists can't get life to start from non-life today. You know, genetic information reads forwards and backwards. Our best technology reads in one direction. It is so complex. One mathematician and molecular biologist calculated the odds of just one DNA arranging itself in nature to be 1 in 10 to the 100 billionth power. Well, what kind of a number is that? Well, if you played your state's lottery every week, for your odds of winning your lottery every week for the next 27,000 years in a row is better than one DNA chromosome forming on its own in nature. So it just simply doesn't happen. Jack Sostek was a Nobel Prize winning Harvard professor, and he announced to the world that he had proven that RNA could self-replicate. And that was a big step in overcoming the law of biogenesis. But the next year he finally admitted, I really didn't have any evidence. I just wanted to believe it so bad. I said that I had. And the thing I want to point out there is you see this over and over and over with very reputable scientists who are so caught up in trying to prove Darwinism took place they do things that are just way below their level of intelligence and integrity. That's a good example. But they're just so desperate because they don't have any evidence. And the reason they have no evidence is it never happened. It's a scientific impossibility. We'll get to that in just a couple more minutes. Narrative number 3, neo-Darwinism, that mutations create the new and beneficial genetic information. Now, I'm a father and a grandfather, and I'm pretty sure that all fathers and grandfathers out there will agree they've never been in the waiting room waiting for their child or grandchild to be born, hoping and praying that that child is mutated. Mutations don't make things better, but that's neo-Darwinism. They say mutations create the new and beneficial genetic information that led to macro type change. Now, they have a whole list of different types of supposed mutations: point mutations, Hox gene mutations, duplication mutations. Frame shift mutations are one of the common ones. They can come in deletions, insertions, or inversions. So just for an example, let's just take one. We'll look at a deletion. We'll use these simple sentences. The day was hot. The hot day had one sun. The sun was hot the one day. You can have a deletion mutation that deletes that very first letter, that first T. Well, all the information would shift to the left, and you end up with this. Now, technically, they've got 17 new words, but it's all gibberish. They've lost all the functional words and all of the useful information. So what I want to point out here is if you want to lose a debate with a Darwinist, say that nature cannot produce new information. There's 17 new words right there, but it's not functional information. If you want to win the debate, say that nature cannot produce new and beneficial genetic information, and then you win the debate hands down. Their frame shift, all their mutations are caused by the sorting or loss of what was already there. And at best, they're generally neutral, and they won't add the type of information that'll lead to macro type evolution, Darwinian evolution. Because mutations, again, result from the sorting or loss of genetic information. They produce weaker gene pools. This is called genetic depletion, or for short, gene depletion. Now, historical narrative number 4 is micro and macro evolution are the same thing, that micro adds up to macro, or Darwinian macro evolution. Now, macro is Darwinian evolution. It would be a dog or a canine producing a non-canine, like, let's say, a whale, which is basically what they teach happened over, of course, the magic ingredient, millions and billions of years of time. But macroevolution requires massive amounts of new and beneficial genetic information added to a gene pool. As gene pools get stronger and stronger and stronger, real science goes against this. Microevolution, which are changes within the kind, scientifically within a family, let's say canines. On the screen, you see several types of canines. You can get micro changes, microevolution. It's best to get the word evolution out of there, but microevolution, microadaptations, microvariations are all the same thing. It's like saying I stepped out on the front porch, the front deck, the front patio. They're all the same thing. Micro changes are caused, remember, macro needs massive amounts of new and beneficial genetic information added to a gene pool. Microevolution, microadaptations are caused by the sorting or loss of the parent's starting genetic information as gene pools get weaker and weaker and weaker. Micro produces weaker and weaker gene pools, so kinds can only bring forth after their kind. Dogs can only bring forth dogs. Roses only bring forth roses. People only bring forth people. The changes, the adaptations, the variations within the kind are caused by the sorting or loss of the parent's starting information. That's a micro change. Micro changes, the gene pool goes down. Darwinian macro needs massive amounts of new and beneficial being added, causing gene pools to get better and better. Real science, a believer's best friends, knows of no viable way for nature to add appreciable amounts of new and beneficial genetic information. It just doesn't happen. Darwinian evolution is a scientific impossibility. So the only thing that real science, a believer's best friend, finds is kinds only bring forth after their kind. Like I said, people bring forth people, pine trees bring forth pine trees, canines bring forth canines. The reason it's vital for everybody, whether you're a Christian, an atheist, or anywhere in between, to understand that science shows that kinds only bring forth after their kind through the sorting or loss of genetic information, is that 10 times in the book of Genesis, we're told that plants or animals will bring forth after their kind. And here we are in the year 2026, and the only thing science finds is kinds only bring forth after their kind, just like the Word of God told us 10 times in the book of Genesis. Now, these microadaptations, like mutations, result from the sorting or loss of the functional genetic information. They produce weaker and weaker gene pools, so gene depletion applies to both mutations and microadaptations. And this is how for 25 years I've been showing people how to destroy Darwinism in 4 seconds flat. Gene depletion plus natural selection makes Darwinism a scientific impossibility. Gene pools get weaker and weaker until they die off. Now, natural selection is actually a misnomer, and in my new book, Consider the Cost, I explain this well. I'll try to explain it here quickly. There is no such thing as natural selection. That's a misnomer. It's actually, all it is 2 words. Natural selection put together is 2 words. There's no selector out there that can determine which gene pool is better or stronger or more fit. Why do we see weaker gene pools dying off? Well, because it's a very deliberately designed genetic system by God. We've always, for years, talked about how God put a wide variety of genetic information in his various gene pools to allow for adaptations. Those adaptations will result in the loss of genetic information as gene pools get weaker and weaker. Why do we see weaker gene pools disappearing? It's a deliberately designed quality assurance system that God put into his gene pools. If they lose too much, they die off so they don't corrupt the rest of the gene pools. That keeps the original created gene pools sound. So it's not natural selection, it's God's quality assurance program. Just like a manufacturing plant has a quality assurance program that removes defects from the product line, God actually, this is a part of his intelligent design. There is no such thing as natural selection. So you'll never see nature produce, let's say, a golden finch retriever. It's simply not going to happen. So students are given lots of examples of biblically correct microadaptations, like brown butterflies producing yellow or orange butterflies, or red roses producing yellow or white roses. But they then show these biblically correct micro changes caused by the loss of information, but they switch and they don't talk about the loss of information, and they switch the discussion to Darwinian macroevolution and mislead people by the hundreds of millions of thinking this is proof of Darwinism, when that's the opposite of Darwinism, and it's exactly what the Bible told us would take place 10 times in Genesis. Darwinists focus the discussion on biblically correct micro adaptations because there's never been any example of Darwinian macroevolution to show anybody. It never happened. It's a scientific possibility, as gene depletion plus God's QA program make Darwinism a scientific impossibility. Even Darwin, he noticed at the Galapagos Island, the finches. He saw finches producing what? Finches with slight variations within them as they brought forth after their kind. He jumped to the miraculously erroneous conclusion that given enough time, they would add up and change into better and better things, not realizing, because we knew nothing about genetics then, that the changes were caused by the sorting or loss of the information already there, not by the gain of new and beneficial genetic information, as Darwinian macroevolution requires and fails to have in nature. Historical narrative 5a, homology, the study of similarities. Let's just talk briefly about similar biochemistry. We're told over and over that chimps and humans share 98% of their same genes in their biochemistry. Now, real science, a believer's best friend, I've seen articles in Nature magazine saying there's a 30% difference. So why do they still say a 1 or 2% difference? That's just a fraud. And if they're going to teach that similar biochemistry proves our evolutionary past, they should be teaching that we came from worms, because our biochemistry is about 75% the same as that from some worms. In fact, our biochemistry is 50% the same as that from a banana. I'll often ask, hey, did anyone evolve from a banana? And when I'm in a college, 500 kids will raise their hand, and they're serious because they've been taught we came from a common ancestor found in a population of primitive unicellular organisms. But I've got to tell you, I got home and checked my family tree, and I found maybe a fruit cake and a handful of nuts, but no bananas in there whatsoever. Narrative number 6, antibiotic or poison resistance, is proof for Darwinian macroevolution. These have nothing to do with Darwinian change. Let me take insecticide resistance as an example. If I had 1,000 cockroaches on the floor, and those watching, they were running right toward you, but I sprayed insecticide on them and it killed 998, but 2 survived. Did those 2 instantaneously evolve an immune system? Of course not. They already had the gene in their gene pool that allowed them to survive that particular poison. The others didn't have it, or is switched on or off in the wrong position, and they died off. Now these 2, when they have offspring, they get that same resistant gene, and they become immune to the poison. They evolved nothing. It was already there. So why do Darwinists use this as one of their prime examples of macroevolution? Because they don't have any real evidence to come up with. Gene depletion puts God's QA program make Darwinian macroevolution a scientific impossibility. Narrative number 7 comes from a study of embryos, embryology. Kids, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Now, how's a kid supposed to argue with that? That basically means you go through your evolutionary stages while you're in your mother's womb. Now, this was invented about 1869, about 10 years after Darwin's book came out. Ernst Haeckel loved Darwin's theory, but he was like most Darwinists, all Darwinists, I should say. He couldn't find any evidence that it took place, so he did what Darwinists have become famous for. He drew some evidence. Now, left to right across the top are his drawings of fish, salamanders, and humans in their embryonic stage, supposedly. Right below are the pictures which don't look like his drawings. And it was proven in the 1870s that Haeckel had taken a human embryo, made copies of the human with slight changes, and then labeled them fish, salamander, turtles, etc. This was called the theory of recapitulation, or the biogenetic law, and it was a total fraud from the start. Yet here is a modern college textbook using Haeckel's original drawings as their proof. Unbelievable. And it says to the students reading it, whether they develop into fish, amphibians, or humans, all vertebrate embryos start out very similar with gill slits and a long tail. You had gill slits and a long tail? And then it goes on to ask rhetorically, why would humans have embryos with gill slits and a tail unless their ancestors had one of these features? And kids' faith is destroyed. But the fact of the matter is, those are folds in the skin. Not gill slits. They were never gills or gill slits. They develop into organs in the throat and bone area. And you never had a tail. Now, one of the first things that do develop in a human embryo is the backbone. And we did call the end of the backbone the tailbone. It had nothing to do with having a tail. That's just what we called it. You never had a tail. You never had gill slits. All they have are frauds in the textbooks that fool people by the millions. Historical narrative number 8, the fossil record. The fossil record is a total embarrassment to the religious fairy tale of Darwinian evolution, but they claim it supports their theory. That's all bluff and bluster. Here's a evolutionary tree of life from a textbook, and as you can see at the base it says invertebrate ancestor. Why don't they show what it was? And then they have these nice colorful lines connecting the word invertebrate ancestor to almost all kinds of life forms across the planet. But do you actually see any evidence there of Darwinian macroevolution? For any of that to be actual science, one of those lines would require thousands of missing links in the fossil record as this invertebrate ancestor slowly evolved into a worm or a shark or a crocodile or an ape or whatever they want to say. And the fossil record is a total embarrassment to Darwinian evolutionism. And by the way, if you notice, all their nice drawings, their colorful lines, their nice drawings of their evidence, there's an old saying that goes like this: Darwinists are experts at drawing things that never existed to support their theory that never took place. Honestly, if you take away their box of crayons, they're left with nothing. I mean, nothing. So this textbook tries to get kids to think that lobe-finned fish, they say, went extinct 325 million years ago and couldn't swim, so it walked around on the bottom of the ocean, and I guess it got bored, so it crawled out one day and became an amphibian. Well, that's a nice story, but the amphibian has feet, shoulders, elbows, ankles, muscular system, and skeletal system, central nervous system that fish don't have. And real science knows of no way for nature to add information, appreciable, beneficial information to a gene pool. So this really fell apart on him too when the lobe-finned fish, which they say went extinct, actually is found alive today in several oceans. He's a very good swimmer. He doesn't walk around on the bottom of the ocean floor. But more telling is the fossilized version that we're told is 325 million years old. And we'll cover the age of the Earth issue and how the flood wipes out all old Earth beliefs in the next segment that we do together. But the fossilized version looks just like the living version with no evolutionary change. So keep that in mind. I'm going to show you some fraud that's at a level it's just stupefying. But keep in mind the lobe-finned fish shows no evolutionary change from the fossil version to the living version. Appropriately, on April Fool's Day of 2006, they introduced what is now one of the two messiahs for Darwinian evolution, Tiktaalik. And the New York Times wrote, it's still a fish, but exhibiting changes that anticipate the beginnings of wrists, elbows, and shoulders. Wait a minute. It doesn't have the beginnings. It has changes that anticipate random chance mutations. They're going to change the nubby little bone into wrists, elbows, shoulders, the central nervous system, the muscular system, etc. Unbelievable. He has a nubby little bone in its side. That's what they're talking about. Now, follow me on this because the fraud is beyond human comprehension here. But Tiktaalik, their new messiah, and the fossilized lobe-finned fish have the same small little nubby bone in their side. Now, in the lobe-finned fish, the fossilized version and the living one also has that bone that never changed one iota. It's still a nubby little bone. So they find Tiktaalik, which is a lobe-fin type fish, and they claim it changed into wrists, elbows. That's just a fraud, out and out lie. What can I say? Today there's several fish with this nubby little bone that's never changed, no evolutionary change whatsoever, yet Tiktaalik is used as one of their messiahs, leading me to ask the simple question, why don't they get the frauds and the lies out of the textbooks and just fill the textbooks with all the evidence of Darwinian macroevolution having taken place? Well, they don't have any. It never happened. Gene depletion plus God's QA program makes Darwinian evolution a scientific impossibility. It never happened. You know, we find insects and reptiles entombed in amber, and we're told that's petrified tree sap. And we're told that these things are 250 million years old, yet the reptiles and the insects in the amber are just like the reptiles and insects alive today with no evolutionary change. Are you starting to see a picture here? So they came up with a theory back in the 1930s. It was the hopeful monster theory to explain why they had no evidence in the fossil record. I think Phil's name was Richard Goldschmidt. He came up with the hopeful monster that, well, maybe birds laid eggs and reptiles popped out, or reptiles laid eggs and birds popped out, but it left no evidence behind. Well, people were laughing at that. So in the early 80s, Niles Eldridge and Stephen Gould changed hopeful monster slightly. Now, this is a key concept to explain why the fossil evidence doesn't work for Darwinism. It's called punctuated equilibrium. If a kid were to ask a professor, why is there no evidence of Darwinian change in the fossil record? They're going to hear, well, punctuated equilibrium. Don't you know anything? What this means is evolution didn't happen over a long period of time. There's a spurt of evolution and a long period with no change. They call it stasis, and a spurt of evolution and a long period with no change. And because of that, no evidence got captured in the fossil record. They actually have a theory to explain why they've got no evidence in the fossil record. But I thought science was knowledge derived from the study of evidence. Darwinian evolution is not science. It is a historical narrative, a great big fairy tale that has misled not millions, billions of people. Let's go back to homology, a study of similarities. We talked about similar biochemistry, but what about similar bone structure? Here's a college book, and it shows Nice drawings, by the way, of the forearm of a lizard leading to the forearm of a human or a cat, the flipper of a whale, the wing of a bat. And they say, look, they all have two bones in the forelimb, proof they've evolved from a common ancestor. Interesting enough, who do they say the common ancestor is we all evolved from? The lobe-fin fish, which is found fossilized and alive today with no change whatsoever. And they're teaching college students we evolved from the lobe-fin fish. Mind-boggling dishonesty at a level that it's so deep that it's hard to believe they're even doing this. But I can make Darwinism look silly, which it is. I can make it look like a fraud, which it is. But hey, myself and Donny and Samuel, we're not in those classrooms, unfortunately. And actually, any argument of similarities is a better argument of a similar designer, not that you evolved from a wet rock, leaving no evidence behind. Historical narrative number 9, this from Berkeley. Birds are simply a twig on the dinosaurs' tree of life. I don't know why they came up with this. The dinosaurs changed into birds. Just open themselves up for a lot of laughter, to be honest with you. This also from Berkeley. Take feathers, Compsognathus, of all the first hair-like feathers. Compsognathus was a small dinosaur about the size of a chicken, and it was the messiah for Darwinists, saying that was the first feathered dinosaur. But back in 2017, they found a well-preserved Compsognathus fossil, and it had 100% scales, no feathers whatsoever. And all the claimed feathered dinosaurs had either hair or were extinct flightless birds. There has never been a feather of a dinosaur found. Archaeopteryx, he was found 2 years after Darwin's book came out. He was found in 1861, and it was claimed that it was a reptile evolving into a bird. But this has been totally debunked for years. In fact, now some Darwinists claim he's a feathered dinosaur, but Archaeopteryx was the size of a pigeon and had claws on its wings. So they said it was a reptile becoming a bird. But actually, the hoatzins found in South America today, it's about the size of a pigeon, has claws on its wings. No one's claiming it's a missing link. You know why? Because you could test, study, and observe it, and he wouldn't hold up for an hour to a real scientist and a real scientific test. So the Hoytson debunks Archaeopteryx completely as any sort of a missing link. And even more, reptile DNA doesn't have the genetic information to form feathers that are very complex structures. And real science, a believer's best friend, knows of no way for nature to add new and beneficial genetic information in any appreciable amount to an existing gene pool. And let's get to historical narrative number 10, the hominids, the supposed closest link between ape and man. It's interesting to me, I get asked all the time, if apes evolved into humans, why do we still have apes? Well, Darwinists will say we didn't evolve directly from apes. We had a primate ancestor, and humans went one way and apes went the other. Okay, fine, but then they spend all their time trying to show us fossils that show apes did evolve into humans. I think they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. But here's a textbook showing humans connected to jellyfish and starfish and worms, and their proof, a nice red line. What more could you want than a nice red line? What about some hominids, or excuse me, some fossil evidence? Oh, that's right. Punctuated equilibrium, there's no evidence to have found. Let's look at a couple of the famous hominids. The great Piltdown man was their messiah from about 1910 to the mid 1950s. These jokers, or what was found was a skull cap and a jawbone. And this went into textbooks for about 45 years. And these guys were world famous evolutionists for the rest of their lives, speaking on any college campus they wanted. And this Piltdown man misled not millions, billions of people into rejecting Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And then in the mid 50s, it was proven these jokers had taken the skull cap from a human, the jawbone from an orangutan, filed them down to fit together, acid treated both sides, buried in a Maroc quarry in Piltdown, England, waited 2 years and came along and dug up Piltdown man and spent the rest of their lives as world-renowned Darwinists and misled not millions, billions of people. Nebraska man was used as proof of Darwinism. All they found in Nebraska man was a piece of a broken tooth. But from that broken tooth, they reconstructed Nebraska man, even the tools he would have worked with in his family. It was later proven that tooth came from an extinct peccary, an extinct pig. This is likely Nebraska man right here. So besides Tiktaalik, the other Messiah has been Lucy. They found about 40% of a skeleton of Lucy back about 1974. And they said that they knew it was an ape becoming human because the thigh bone angled to the knee, and humans have angled thigh bones. They forgot to mention that all tree-dwelling apes have angled thigh bones. They said, well, the knee in question was slightly bigger than a normal ape's knee. Well, if you took everyone's knee listening to this broadcast, they would have different sizes. So that doesn't prove anything. They also forgot to mention the knee in question was found a mile away and 230 feet deeper in the strata. I don't think that was Lucy's knee. Now, they found other fossils since. They're called Australopithecus afarensis, and they have curved toes and curved fingers so they can grab onto tree limbs. It is a tree-dwelling ape. Yet here's a textbook with a drawing of Lucy walking upright like a human with normal human feet, a little hairy, but normal human feet, and talking on a cell phone. I mean, what are the odds of that? But back in 1987, it was reported anatomists concluded Lucy is not a link between ape and man and did not walk upright like a human. They hunched over, drugged their knuckles on the ground. Their drawings, if you take away their box of crayons, they truly have nothing. And just common sense. With millions of various apes and monkeys having lived and died over the last 500 years alone, I have to ask, why does finding one of their bones prove Darwinian macroevolution? Doesn't it just prove that when monkeys and apes die, they leave their bones behind? Absolutely. And my friends, those are the top 10 historical narratives, the top 10 frauds of Darwinian evolution. And we just waded through them all in about a 35-minute talk. We own the truth, but they own the system. And that's where the problem is. You know, with so many Christians and Christian kids leaving the faith, I think that we should take on these issues and answer them for everybody, because real science is on the side of the believer, with over 80% of the branches of modern science started by Christians to study God's creation. It was Christianity that led to modern science and Western civilization. If you want help, our resources make a big difference. And I actually have a newer book than this out now called Consider the Cost, covers the top 10 old earth beliefs and more. Have a couple of coloring books with a lot of information. And we have, I have a thumb drive with my 5 top teachings, starting with the top 10 Darwinian frauds. These are the 5 teachings on there. I do not copyright my information. If someone gets that thumb drive, you can make 1 million copies. I hope that you'll do that. Just got a call last week from a man in Michigan. He's made over 700 copies and given them away. A woman in Washington State has given over 1,000 copies away. It's a great way to meet and reach people, and you can ask them, hey, make copies and give this away. We've got to get it out there. It's called our Give a Reason thumb drive. So I didn't realize I had those on there, to be honest with you. So let me end with this. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, I say we can rebuild those foundations. Amen. And guys, Donny and Sam, if you guys want to come back in, that'd be great.
Absolutely, Russ. That flew by. I blinked and it was over. And yet that was 50 minutes. Excellent work. A lot of important information there and a lot to discuss, that is for sure. And so perhaps I'll start off our Q&A or discussion with this. You, closer to the beginning of your talk, talked about microevolutionary variations. You discussed mutations, the deleterious nature of mutations and how they accumulate and result in genetic degeneration rather than forward large-scale germs to geniuses, microbes to mammals evolution. Evolutionists will say this, though, Russ. They'll say, well, you creationists don't have enough imagination, because take microevolution today. We all agree there's variations. There's 330 plus breeds of dogs, for example. There's a good amount of variation within domestic dogs. And they'll say, and Richard Dawkins has argued this as well, just take those microevolutionary variations and extrapolate them over deep time, and now you can get those large scale changes. And they'll even compare it to things like your fingernails growing. You don't really see each moment your fingernails are growing, but wait a couple weeks and they're a little bit longer. Or plate movements, and then the uplift of mountains. You can't see the mountains fully rise up, but over time they will. So basically, microevolutionary variations plus a lot of time equals large scale evolution. Russ, what's a good response to that?
Well, I've heard that before. It goes back to, how long did it take to fill that pan with oil, right? But keep in mind, the micro changes are caused by the sorting or loss of genetic information. So they never add up to Darwinian macro change because they get worse and worse. I had a professor one time, we went over this over and over when I was speaking at college campuses, and he just couldn't understand that. And finally, I just said, okay, let's give you all the bacteria cells you want. Let's forget about the law of biogenesis, and let's give you billions, even trillions of bacteria cells. Now, the micro changes are caused by the sorting and the loss of information, as bacteria can only bring forth bacteria. But let's say you're saying that micro changes lead to Darwinian macroevolution. So my question would be, exactly how much genetic information does that bacteria cell have to lose to become, let's say, a biology professor? How much information does a bacteria cell lose over time to add up to that type of macro change? And as a general rule, that kind of ends that discussion.
Russ, it's a great response, a lot to dig into there. So I'll say this as a follow-up, then Sam will throw it to you. I know there's a lot we want to engage. I like the fact that your presentation, Russ, was really, really well-rounded. You discussed mutations, abiogenesis. You discussed the Urey Miller experiment. You went into hominins, transitional fossils. So there's so much there, which is good. So critics will say, okay, but you as young Earth creationists, you believe it's been about 4,500 years since the flood, roughly 6,000 to 7,000 years since creation. Well, from the flood to the start or initiation of these civilizations like Egypt, for example, ancient Egypt and other ancient civilizations, they have depictions of animal species like tigers and lions and jaguars. And so relatively quickly, they'll say from the flood to the rise of these civilizations, you have to explain all these millions of species through micro evolutionary variations, basically. So they have asserted that we as young Earth creationists, we believe in more evolution than they do. They call us hyper evolutionists. Is that true? And what's a good way to engage that assertion, Russ?
I don't know that I've ever actually been confronted with that specific question, but how long did it take to come up with the 340, 350 types of dogs we have today? Kinds can bring forth after their kind very, very quickly. One generation can come up with multiple micro variations within the same, let's say, group of puppies. So it doesn't take a long time for the variations to set in and take place. They can vary generation to generation. So 4,500 years is quite a bit of time. As far as the adaptations, we only see changes. Dogs have only produced dogs. Through the loss of information, we get variations. Pine trees, humans. All humans made in the image of God. We didn't evolve at different levels. We were separated at Babel. The people spread out. The oceans, the ice caps melted and filled in and led to different looking people groups. But that's all come about in just the last 4,500 or so years. So I don't think we have any problem showing relatively quick adaptational changes caused by the sorting or loss of information. What we don't have is any change of one kind, one family changing into a different kind through the addition of massive amounts of new and beneficial genetic information. We can show adaptations taking place. They can't show macro change taking place.
Well, I think that's a good answer. And one major assumption that I believe this challenge is based on, Russ. And Sam, you and I have discussed this or brought it up in debates where it's the evolutionists that explain the vast majority of DNA differences and DNA diversity that can result in change over time. They'll say, well, mutations and selection can act on those mutations, and beneficial mutations can drive forward evolutionary change. They're the ones that assume all of those DNA differences are the result of mutations over time. But you've pointed out that the vast majority of mutations are deleterious. They're moving species downhill rather than uphill. And so I would argue that the vast majority of DNA variation that can result in adaptation, like you're referring to, Russ, is actually due to initial design. And so for that reason, from the flood leading up to the rise of these ancient civilizations like Egypt to now, a lot of these changes and variations are due to the pre-existing ability for that change that God would have front-loaded at the beginning, at creation. And so there's no large-scale evolution. This is just a lot of morphological adaptability, but no real true anatomical change. Isn't that right, Russ?
Absolutely. That's all science has ever seen. That's the key is actual science, operational science has never seen Darwinian macroevolution take place. They've only seen kinds bringing forth after their kind, micro changes, whether you want to call it microevolution, microadaptation, microvariation, through the sorting or loss of what the parents started with. As gene pools get weaker and weaker through micro changes, as kinds bring forth after their kind. So, we can always argue the what ifs or the God could haves, but I always bring about what did God say he did and what does actual science show took place. I had someone the other day saying, well, God made man from the dirt, so couldn't bacteria have come from the dirt? And I didn't see where the argument was. It was God told us how he made Adam, what he made Adam from, I should say. He didn't say anything about how he made bacteria. So he may have made bacteria from the dirt, but arguing over the what ifs just doesn't make any sense because they can go on forever and ever and ever. But the thing that real science shows and what God's word says is that kinds only bring forth after their kind. That's what God said. That's what the science shows. So I think you and we just need to stick with the real science and God's word and let them play their what if games.
There's a clip out there from Neil deGrasse Tyson where he says that, it's the most poetic and beautiful thing he can think of, that, all men come from stardust. And so, when they scoff about God forming man out of the dust of the earth, I don't think they realize that they also believe that they come from that same dust.
We just add an intelligent creator, and you look at the genetic information today, and there was a quote from a known Darwinist years ago when the RNA DNA system became known. He said that should have brought the debate between creation and evolution to a screeching halt. And there are some really good videos out there by some good groups, which unfortunately are theistic evolutionists, but they have some great videos on the operating systems inside of a cell, and it's really mind-boggling to think that came about on its own.
Yeah, it's funny because you would think, okay, rationally, let's think this through. They would think that someday that the minds in the laboratory will have enough knowledge to be able to create life from these chemicals that are there. But by doing that, they're unwittingly acknowledging that mind is necessary. And should that day come, which I don't think that it would come, but should that day come, all they're going to prove is that you do in fact need a very brilliant mind to create that life.
Yeah, exactly.
So before you went through your points, you talked briefly about the uniformity of nature being a foundational precondition for their model. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that's a topic that I like to dive into regularly. I think it's powerful, and the critics have no justification for that uniformity. Why would they believe in an evolving universe that there would be uniform processes extrapolated all the way back to that singularity?
That's a good question. And of course, as you know, in 2 Peter 3, God told us this would be one of their key concepts in the last days. In fact, and we'll talk about the age of the earth the next time we get together, but uniformity is a key concept in modern geology. Modern geology is really based on two beliefs. Processes we see today are uniform, and there was never a global flood. As you know, they're adamant about that global flood. I used to speak on college campuses, and I could talk about Darwinism and destroy Darwinism, and they would get mad, but there was nothing else they could do except get mad, because all they had to do was give one example of Darwinian macroevolution having taken place, and it would blow me right out of the auditorium and make me and the Bible look silly. But they couldn't do it because they don't have any evidence. Gene depletion plus God's QA program makes Darwinian macroevolution impossible. But if I start talking about the age of the earth, I had to have bodyguards. I mean, they understand. If you mention global flood, and you guys have seen this, they will go ballistic, because the global flood wipes out every old earth belief. We'll talk about this in the next section, because you get me going on this, and I can go on for a long time. So, but uniformity is a key. It is the key belief, that in denial of the flood, which would have wiped out the belief in uniformity, for the age of the earth issues. In biology, etc., if they're going to look at past events, well, there's no basis to be able to study a past event from. It's non-observable. It happened in the non-observed past. So I guess they just cling to uniformity, and they see the rate of mutations today. They see the rate of canyon formation via flow through the Colorado River, the Grand Canyon, etc. The only thing they can test and observe are today's rates. So I guess that just leaves them with uniformity. I think it's a faulty example. We see things happening quickly. Mount St. Helens, we can talk about that next time too. Mount St. Helens just blew the non-observed belief in uniformity right out of the water. But why they cling to it? I guess you have to ask them, why do they cling to it? I don't know why they would, because it's easy to show non-observed events are not uniform. It's very easy, just like the oil draining from the car. Very simple example.
Yeah, they need that uniformity to extrapolate these processes back billions and billions of years to that singularity, or millions of years on this evolutionary timeline. And so, I started kind of this research project. I was reading a book by Norman Geisler. Norman Geisler's big book of apologetics. He's a Christian apologist, and he was addressing or confronting these objections to miracles within the biblical narrative. We've got these things that they would call miracles. But the problem there is that the critics are going to have to say that there was some sort of meaningful law that was violated. And if they don't have anything that stands in a cause and effect relationship, then there is nothing that dictates what's possible or impossible. Well, if that's the case, then how can you say that uniformity is possible or impossible? How can you extrapolate that back throughout a time index? And he's not the only one who's made this argument. In fact, a prominent atheist, Anthony Flew, he wrote about this in his book, There Is a God. And it's a very, very powerful argument. And I've found that when I've asked even the more sophisticated, science-minded atheists this question, they run from it. They have to run from it. There's really nothing that they can, no justification for that uniformity whatsoever. So that would be the foundation of their whole scientific narrative in a free fall collapse.
Well, they've got to hang on to that because that's all they have. I think you kind of indicated that they lose uniformity, and they really lose it all. What keeps them afloat, because it's pretty easy to poke holes in uniformity. Mount St. Helens, the oil draining from a car, you see a car rear end another car, boom, building to the second, the hood's crumpled. You come along 5 minutes later, you've never seen that. You believe in uniformity. You might think it took billions of years to crumple that hood if you measure the amount of crumpling. It's easy to poke holes in uniformity, but the key here is they own the system. We may own the truth, but they own the system, so they can teach those things. And I think kids in school, students are so busy trying to remember and memorize things so they can pass the test. they usually don't have time to actually think, does this make sense? I mean, is this actually logical? Is this even viable? They're too busy memorizing that it took, 4.6 billion years for this to happen or that to happen. And I think we just don't really think about what we're being told. Maybe kids aren't being taught how to think. They're just being told what to think.
Right.
But uniformity, if they lose uniformity, they lose it all. And that's the global flood. The global flood destroys any belief in uniformity. And that's why they have to believe in uniformity and deny the global flood. Everyone who believes in millions and billions of years has to deny the global flood. And unfortunately, that happens in Christian circles too. Oh, it's just a local flood. And if you're a Christian listening and you've been fooled into believing in old earth beliefs, realize that old earth beliefs are the foundations of atheistic humanism based on a denial of the global flood. You've been taught it was a local flood because, well, a global flood would wipe out the old earth belief. And that's the reason they call us young earth creationists. I don't accept that term. I call myself a biblical creationist. And there's a reason for that. Someone will come up to me at a church where I'm speaking and they're an old earther and they're mad I'm there. And they'll come up to me before I start and get right in my face. Oh, you're one of those young earth creationists. And I just look them in the eye and say, I kind of get a confused look on my face. Young earth creationist. Oh, you mean a Bible believer? Yeah, I believe the Bible's true. What do you believe? And I say that because there's a biblical position, and it's so common now to just make up whatever we want inside of Christian circles. Very important to bring them back to and get them to thinking, wait a minute, oh, there is a biblical position here. And if we are denying the biblical position, we need someone that cares enough about us to come along and point that out to us. So yeah, but that's really more of what we'll be talking about next time with the age of the earth.
Yeah, just one more point really quick. All right. So Donny hosts open mics, and we had a PhD geologist come in, and I pressed him on this issue, and he actually gave up the uniformity. He said, well, as long as there's no violation in the laws of nature, which the laws of nature are a problem for them to justify. But he says, well, as long as there's no violation of those laws of nature, then we have no problem. I said, well, hold on a second. You've just granted us accelerated decay. You've given up your decay rates. You've just given up quite a bit by giving. So, it's a double-edged sword. You're going to get cut no matter which way that sword is yielded. And he interestingly, he also gave us numerous global floods, or at least the possibility of them. Now, of course, he's not going to grant us our timeline, and he's not going to grant us that single flood. But the fact that he was willing to grant that the earth at one time had been submerged, I think he gave us quite a bit right there.
Yes, definitely. Well, it sounds like he was trying to hold the secular line, yet he was trying to be honest too.
Yes.
I'll give him credit for that. So that was nice. That was very nice. Well, you guys have really gotten into it with some of these guys, and by putting them on the spot, a lot of times, the PhD guys, they sat in secular schools longer than anybody. So they're just repeating what the secular story is. And they probably never really given it a lot of thought other than talk about how silly those of us who don't accept their timelines are. But when they actually sit down and talk with us, they start finding, because they've been taught we're anti-science, when actually they're the science deniers, not us. They're the ones denying the real science, and they don't even realize
That's
it.
right.
They spent their whole lives in these secular schools. But the science is on our side. Again, we own the truth. They own the system. And we own the truth not because we're smart. We own the truth because God's word is true.
Amen.
And we believe God's word, so we look at a worldview through God's word being true. So that puts us way ahead of the secular worldview and secular narratives. They don't realize that, though, because all they've heard of the secular narratives, including how stupid people like us are.
Well, we're so silly because we don't believe that we're related to grass, ladybugs, whales, and pine trees. Russ. And so many good points you've brought up. I can't wait for our program next month on the age of the earth and the flood, because I have a ton of questions related to geology for you on that issue. But I guess a teaser, just a little bit on that issue. 2 Peter 3, predicting that in the last days, as you pointed out, there's going to be scoffers that are willingly ignorant. As Kent has said, in the Greek, that means dumb on purpose. They're willingly ignorant of the creation, the flood, right? The world that then was being overflowed with water that perished, and the coming judgment. But it's interesting because we like to point out that it's not necessarily time, but a process. And it's those processes associated with the catastrophic worldwide flood of Genesis that explains or answers their challenges related to worldwide sedimentary rock layers, the billions and billions of fossils, the limestone, the oil, the coal, all of these things that they say require millions and millions of years, lots of time. They're forgetting, no, it's a process. And those processes, especially those sped up during the flood, can explain a lot of those features, Russ.
It answers, I believe, all the questions. And if you go to Mount St. Helens, which I know you guys have, Sam, I'm sure you've when I say go there, I mean talk about it. The things we saw happen there, which in textbooks, secular textbooks, we're told take hundreds of millions of years, and they took place in a matter of minutes and hours there. We actually saw it happen quickly. Various things that it really crushes the belief in uniformity, especially in geology. If secular geology was really about science, Geology 101 would be about all the great things they saw form in a matter of minutes or hours at Mount St. Helens. But instead, they try to hide that. They don't want to talk about that. So, we've seen things happen quickly. In geology, we've seen kinds only bring forth after their kind. In biology, the real science and the real evidence is on our side, and they actually, I think you could write a really good book or make a really good presentation and show how they're really the science deniers.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the top 10 denials of science by the secular world,
Why evolutionism is a science fiction religion.
That's right.
And this brings this question to mind, because you've offered the challenge to the evolutionists to provide the empirical evidence for why they believe microbes evolved into mammals, fish to fishermen, this process of large-scale evolution, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, eventually man. We know mutations are overwhelmingly deleterious, nearly neutral. They accumulate. They're subject to genetic drift. They put shelf lives on genomes and species. That's a major problem for the evolutionists. But they'll say this, Russ. They'll say, well, we have what's called gene duplication, where regions or portions of the genome can duplicate. And then in technical terms, they call this neo-functionalization, where the new duplicated gene can experience mutations and therefore change or alter itself from the non-duplicated gene or region, and therefore add new functional beneficial mutation. And so my question is, in your opinion, what's the best way to respond to the evolutionist that says we can get new functional beneficial mutation and novel evolutionary change through gene duplications followed by subsequent mutation accumulation?
Well, copying errors or duplication errors are a scientific fact. They're not overly common. They're rare, but they do happen. But it would be like if the printer made 3 copies, or let's say 2 copies of page 52 in my book, it wouldn't add any new information to my book. You just have 2 pages of page 52s. As far as them then having their completely worthless information there in a second copy, it causes confusion within the genetic system. It doesn't add a benefit in any way. As far as them saying it sits there, well, there's no reason for it to stay there, because they're using resources that whatever creature is that had the duplication is using resources to support that, which makes it weaker than the others, maybe not on a terrible degree. But eventually they're saying mutations then change that information into better information. Well, why don't we see mutations causing new and beneficial information right now? Why do they have to have a copy of something, and all of a sudden in the copy it's going to make beneficial, changes? That doesn't really add up. You're talking random mutations. That's one of the what ifs that it's almost like, what do you argue with? Copy mutations only, and duplication errors only copy what was already there. They don't add new and beneficial. And to make a claim that, well, maybe in the land of Oz there will be a mutation that creates a benefit here, although we never see mutations create benefit in the other 600 million species out there. But some reason in the copied information it might happen. That's such a long shot might if. Honestly, I find it hard to argue with such a ridiculous claim. We can show how copying errors do not add beneficial. It just makes a copy of what's already there. And we can show how mutations do not add new and beneficial information anywhere else. So why would it do so in some miscopied information? And why would that miscopied information make a change?
Well, I think you nailed it when you pointed to your book as an example. You randomly duplicate a couple of the pages within the book. If I gave you a copy of this book and then I gave you 3 extra copies. Ooh, okay. Is there any new information? No, you just have 3 or 4 copies of the same book. But then the evolutionist argument is, oh, okay, but then in the new copies that I give you, we'll start introducing spelling mistakes or typographical errors, and then that'll change the information from the original book. It'll be new information. But is that new, meaningful, beneficial information? Because now, as those typographical errors accumulate, because that's what a mutation is, a random change in the nucleotide sequence of DNA, ATCG. And so if we're introducing spelling mistakes in that additional copy of the book that you already own, now you got 2 or 3 copies, isn't that just resulting in a more messed up copy of that book? Eventually those typographical errors or spelling mistakes will accumulate, and then that book will be unreadable. You're going to want to go back to that original book. So to the evolutionists, how is this meaningful change, Russ?
It's only in their minds, and they're hoping that it is. But again, we can show mutations are caused by the sorting or loss of the starting information. They might be neutral. They might make some sort of a change. There are rare examples where a mutation might actually be a benefit, but only in certain circumstances. In the long term, it's still caused by the loss of information. So in the real world, they can't show mutations powering Darwinian macroevolution. Okay, they can't show that. So now they're saying, but a copying error, given them billions of years of time, maybe that did. Well, show us some. They should be able to show millions of beneficial mutations adding massive amounts of new and beneficial information to make positive changes in creatures, even changing one kind into another kind. They can't show us any viable ones. So there's no reason to assume that all of a sudden you get a copying error and mutations would. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah, it's an argument that really is out of desperation. And I guess now thinking about it, I would say, well, show me some mutations, not only in copying errors, but in deletions, insertions, etc., Hox genes, whatever you want to do. Show me some that actually led to Darwinian macro change, and that's going to bring an end to that argument pretty quickly.
Sam, I got one more question, then we'll hand it to you, brother. More informed apologists of evolution, because again, it's a science fiction religion, they'll meet that challenge and point to a few examples, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on those examples. A few that come to mind: antibiotic resistance, sickle cell anemia, but a big one, and I think those are really easy to debunk, but a big one that they like is, well, there's these nylon digesting bacteria. So these bacteria have evolved apparently the ability to digest nylon. And so that's new information being added to the bacterial genome because they weren't able to digest nylon prior to this. And so to them, that's an example of a true beneficial mutation, Russ.
Did you want me or Sam to respond?
I guess, Russ, I'm curious as to your thoughts on that. Would you see that as an answer to the challenge that you put forth to them?
No, because I think that they found some bacteria that had become able to digest nylon. I think that was back in the 70s. But by the 90s, they had proven that what had happened was the bacteria had lost the ability to digest protein. And so they switched over and were able to digest nylon. They became nylon, but it was still just bacteria producing bacteria. It was still just a micro change caused by the loss of information. So as far as that being any evidence of anything leading to Darwinian macroevolution, it failed. It was just kinds bringing forth after their kind, caused by the sorting or loss of genetic information. So bacteria eating or nylon eating bacteria did not prove out and hold out for a proof or support for Darwinian macro change. It was just a micro change.
And then for sickle cell anemia, they'll say, well, those with the sickle cell gene, as long as it's manifested, because there's recessive and dominant, but those with the sickle cell trait, they are resistant to malaria. So where malaria could kill a person, these people with sickle cell anemia, they're protected from it. Is that a beneficial mutation, Russ?
In one instance, but it's still a fatal disease. So no, there are mutations and that's an example of a rare one that might provide a benefit in a certain circumstance, but overall it's a non-beneficial mutation. And when you start looking at fatal diseases and claiming that's your proof, you got a problem right there.
As somebody who was a nurse for years and years, you don't want sickle cell anemia. You don't want malaria. Both are bad. But the fact that having sickle cell anemia, this horrible disease, is the idea of a beneficial mutation, to me is wild. And if you look at the genotype of what's going on, it's actually due to, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I studied this, but it's due to a deformed hemoglobin molecule. So it's a broken cell, broken protein, broken information. And so basically the malaria parasite can't get in or something like that. Is that really the best that they got to take? Because it's their assertion that we're related to bacteria. And as you said, with the nylon digesting bacteria, firstly, how do you prove that these bacterial species didn't already have the pre-existing ability to digest man-made nylon anyways, or the loss of information, as you said? Because even their best beneficials oftentimes are reductive due to the breaking down of pre-existing systems. But I just think it's wild. And then Sam, I want to hand it to you, that these are the best so-called examples of beneficial mutations for why we, Russ, should believe that we're literally related to the bacteria itself through common ancestry.
Well, I think after thinking about the sickle cell, maybe I'll become a Darwinist. I mean, goodness gracious, what more proof do you want than that?
Can't deny that.
No, yeah, I'm still waiting for him to bring forth the real evidence. What about you, Sam?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, you made a distinction that we make regularly with the critics, and that's between a higher confidence science, or what you called an operational science, and something that would be more of a lower confidence science, which is a historical science. And I would say a lot of their talking points are neither. They're just purely philosophical or speculative. And so, yeah, when it comes to proving evolution in some meaningful way, and we think of all of the biodiversity that exists on this planet, yeah, they should be able to point to something and bring it through some chain of changes that provide, evidence of something truly becoming something that it previously was not, a cross in what we would call a kind. And there's no examples of that I'm aware of. There's nothing with, all of the experiments that they've done with that E. coli, with fruit flies, bloodworms, fleas. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there, and I'm not aware of anything that provides any meaningful evidence. So you basically brought these 10 points and what we would call more of a model of everything. And I believe that you did a good job of showing that they do not have a model of everything. There's a book called Mind and Cosmos by an atheist, Thomas Nagel. And he, I think some of the best statements come from the unbelievers. And he says, look, what we have is trash, but it's the best we have. And so, and I agree, you got trash, guys, but, yeah. So really, when it comes to abiogenesis, I guess my question here is, they often disassociate abiogenesis from their model because I believe it's a complete disaster. And so, what did Darwin say about that? Did Darwin disassociate a origin of life event from his model of evolution?
Well, he didn't, because he even tried to explain in his that he thought it probably developed in a warm pond, and he tried to speculate on the start of life. But when they finally got to the point where they found that life just can't come from non-life, then now they've separated the start of life from Darwinian or macro evolution. They try to separate it now. I'm willing to give them a bit of that, but I'm not going to let them totally off the hook, because they've got to get life started somehow. So the key concept in modern biology and the study of life has nothing to do with the start of life. There's a problem right there. And Darwin did not disassociate it, but he thought that it would be found that life came from non-life. Now we are well down the road and they cannot get life from non-life. So now they're saying Darwinian evolution has nothing to do with the start of life. I can understand their position, but I think if they're scientists, they've got to at least be able to address the start of life somewhere along the way. And right now the laws are that life only comes from life, and that's a big problem for Darwinists. But it's perfectly fits with God, who created, and then at the end of his creation said the creation's finished. So we should not see life coming from non-life today. That fits the biblical view, but it doesn't fit the Darwinian view at all. And so personally, not to be mean-spirited, but because I do like to watch them squirm, I'm not going to let them totally off the hook on that. They've got to come up with the start of life, or they really have nothing to go on from there. And as you mentioned, they don't have any examples of Darwinian macro. There's hundreds of millions of species on Earth. We don't have a single half this, half that flopping around anywhere. So they're missing on all cylinders. The only thing that keeps them afloat is that they own the system. We may own the truth, but they own the system. And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't let them off the hook, because I'll paraphrase really loosely here, but even Darwin said that that within his model, if something cannot be shown to arise through slow, gradual, or naturalistic processes, then his model would be false. So logically, that would start all the way with that life creating event. And as soon as you get something that duplicates, they want to punt a mystery, say that we don't understand, whatever it might be. But there's a level of complexity there that would be required for something to duplicate. And without that level of complexity, then something would be irreducibly complex. And so, what would you say about that? Just granting them some life duplicating organism, a cell, or whatever it might be. That assumes quite a lot, right?
Well, right. Even if you gave them a bacteria cell or mildew, whichever they want to. I used to say bacteria to Beethoven evolution, and they said no, it wasn't bacteria. So we went to mildew to Mozart. That seemed to make them any happier. But even if you gave them bacteria cells, all the bacteria cells that they could want, the only thing science shows is bacteria cells only produce bacteria cells. You can have micro changes within the cells. You can have various types and variations of bacteria cells. But real science shows of no way for one kind, like a bacteria, to change into something else. So they're still stuck right there. Even if we gave them the start of life, they still would not have they would still not have any way for Darwinian macro change to take place, because the changes caused by the loss of information, and what they need is the massive gains of new and beneficial, not just new and beneficial, massive gains of new and beneficial genetic information. The science just isn't on their side. We can give them life, even get around the law of biogenesis and give them life, and they're still going to have the real science staring them right in the face.
Okay. So my question would be, unless Sam, you had another follow-up, brother?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So your presentation, as we move along, we talked a lot about genetics and mutations, and clearly the best that they have to offer, Russ, are not going to drive large-scale evolution or the reality of genetic degeneration. I like to ask the evolutionists, what kind of selection or mechanism can you present us that are going to rid the populations of organisms of so many low impact, nearly neutral, slightly deleterious mutations that are accumulating? And fellow young earth creationists like Dr. John Sanford, Dr. Rob Carter, they've pointed out in several simulations that even if they truly had a dozen beneficial mutations, which we could debate all day if they even have one, as we've shown, but even if they had dozens, those still wouldn't work towards counterbalancing the damage being done by all of these deleterious mutations. So the evolutionist really does have a challenge on their hands, which is why their position is in science. But what they'll do is they'll then go focus on the fossil record, Russ. And so you mentioned several, Archaeopteryx, Tiktaalik. You did a good job at refuting those. But the evolutionists will say, okay, if you go to the lower layers within the so-called geologic column and you start comparing creatures and organisms in the lower, middle, maybe you're looking at the Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, and then up to where we are today, essentially. You can go to the high Cenozoic, where you see a lot of mammals, and they'll say, oh, right here's evidence of large-scale evolution, where you have the series that you'd expect: fish, amphibians, reptiles, all your dinosaurs kind of localized in one spot, no humans within the dinosaurs. And so essentially this is the ordering of the fossil record argument, Russ. And I know there are many different ways we can approach addressing that, and I'm curious as to what your favorite approach is.
Well, I like to point out that the crust of the earth on average is a mile deep. Sedimentary layers stratified out by grain size, weight, and density by moving water, just like a miner with his pan scoops up some sediments and water, sloshes it back and forth, and the water in his pan separates the sediments in his pan by grain size, weight, and density, gold being the densest falling to the bottom on a global scale. That's what we find: stratified layers separated by grain size, weight, and density, which is why we have all shale grains together, all limestone grains together, all sandstone grains together. The secular world has to believe that nothing but sandstone formed for millions of years, and poof, overnight, nothing but limestone formed for millions of years, and poof, overnight, nothing but shale formed for millions of years. And I mean, it doesn't make any sense if you really think about it. If the layers form slowly, there might be pockets of limestone or pockets of sandstone, but it fairly well be a big brown conglomerate. You know, dinosaurs are found fully dinosaurs. There's no evolutionary links going up to them, and all of a sudden they just disappear. So I don't think the fossil record is much of a benefit for them. I think that the fossil record is an embarrassment to them. In the lower layers, we find trilobites. Trilobite eyes are the most complex eyes we know of, with up to 15,000 lenses. And that was supposed to be, since they're in the lowest layers from a Darwinian standpoint, one of the first things to have evolved. So that doesn't make any sense. So I think that the fossil record is great proof of a global flood. And that's one of the things I show in Grand Canyon that we can talk about in the next time, though. There's 10 primary layers in the canyon, and between the bottom layer and the top layer, which is the Kaibab limestone, the secular view is missing, let's see, it's 1.5 billion years of layers that are supposed to be in between some of those layers. They're not there. One's the great unconformity. We can talk about that. I call it the great inconsistency. And yeah, the fossil record is an embarrassment. The fossil record is a great proof of the global flood. And I think that that when they start getting into geology and the proof for their millions of years, it all hinges on there was never a global flood, because that would wipe out what they teach, and uniform processes. So if they lose either one of those, they lose it all. And we can talk about some of the problems in the Grand Canyon next time when we're talking about the age of the Earth. But there's some pretty cool things you can show in Grand Canyon. And Grand Canyon's one of the what I call the 6 pillars of old Earth beliefs. So we can take those on next time we talk, and take on the different problems, including some at the canyon, and even more so above the canyon. I don't know if you guys probably, have you guys been to the Grand Canyon?
Never. Not me, no.
Well, you've seen pictures of it. Now, it's on average, it's a mile from the rim down to the river. It's a big hole in the ground. But what they won't tell you there is that mile of layers, 10 primary layers, is nothing. There used to be 2 miles of layers above today's rim that have been removed from southern Utah south to the sea, leaving behind what's called geologically the Grand Staircase, which is missing 150 times more sediments than what's missing from that puny little Grand Canyon. And it's such awesome proof of the flood that it left behind Bryce, Zion, and the Vermilion Cliffs. And if you go to Bryce, Zion, or the Vermilion Cliffs, they won't even talk about the events that left them behind, because there's no way to explain it but flooding on a global scale. So the fossil record is truly an embarrassment to Darwinists, but that they rely on the geologic time scale. That's where all old Earth beliefs are derived from, including radiometric dating techniques, must match the time scale. So they can argue about the strata and how it formed, but the fact of the matter is it's separated by grain size, weight, and density of a moving water. There's straight contact points between the various layers, and the fossil record is an embarrassment to Darwinian evolution. So a lot of that's age of the Earth things we can talk about when we talk about the age of the Earth here next time.
I love it. So many good points there, and so much to discuss. And Sam and I, for next month, we'll have a good time putting forth these objections that we've heard from geoscientists like Dr. Howard Feldman, right, Sam? I am curious on this one thing, because you mentioned the great unconformity, or the great inconsistency. Is that what you called it?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to steal that from you. I like that. But all this missing time, right? But then it's interesting, because I see critics of young Earth creation, Russ, they'll actually look to unconformities and present them to us as creationists as a challenge. I've heard them say, well, these represent substantial gaps in the rock record, implying extended periods of erosion or non-deposition, which would be difficult to reconcile with a rapid, catastrophic global flood event. And I'd be curious what a good response to that is.
Well, the flood, if it was just one day the water went through a vent, you would have problems there. But the flood lasted for almost a year. The waters were coming and going. They were laying down some layers. Then they would come back and remove a few of those layers and lay others. And they might remove a few of those and lay others. So it wasn't just one event. It was a year-long event with probably hundreds and hundreds of events in any one particular spot. So you're not going to have, this is one reason the geologic time scale isn't found viably in the order with corresponding index fossils in it, because the waters were coming and going. And the unconformities, like take the great unconformity down in the bottom of Grand Canyon, they're missing 1.2 billion years of layers that are supposed to be there according to the geologic time scale, but they're not there. Well, it wasn't because of millions of years of erosion. It's because of floodwaters came and took those out of there. They laid them down, then came back, took them out, and laid down other layers on top.
That makes sense.
Pretty simple. It was the global flood was a dynamic global aqueous event that literally is beyond human comprehension, the power, but it removed those layers 2 miles deep from above today's rim. Now, the canyon wasn't there at the time. Kaibab limestone makes up the rim. It used to be 2 miles of strata above that had been removed by floodwaters toward the latter part of the flood. It was a very dynamic time. And most of the, we've had 4,500 years of relatively uniform erosion since then, occasional volcanic activity, etc. But most of the world's geological formations formed as a result of the flood or the short time after the flood, including the glacial melt that was a direct result. The glaciers and the ice caps, a direct result of the global flood. We can discuss that next time too.
That was a really important answer. So I feel like a lot of these challenges, like this challenge from unconformities, is based on a straw man or misunderstanding on what the year-long global flood would entail. This is a multi-dimensional, multi-phased event. And another big one, I'll ask this one and then we'll save any other ones for next month because it's such an interesting topic. And so is this similar to how we would answer? Because Sam and I are familiar when Dr. Howard Feldman joins. He's a geoscientist, rejects the global flood, but he likes to show images of what he says are river channels. And he says these river channels are found in various formations, Russ, one being the Morrison Formation, I believe it is. And so the argument is basically, well, this represents prolonged erosion in long-lived river systems. And so how could you account for that in a year-long flood?
Well, I think that again, does he reject the global flood?
Yes. Yeah. So he's trying to say, well, here's examples of, and it's kind of a counter because oftentimes we'll say evidence for the flood, lack of erosion, these fine boundaries, pancake stacked layers. Mm-hmm. And then they'll say, more informed ones, I guess, the geologists in the old earth camp, they say, well, wait a minute, we do have evidence for erosion, like these river channels, or they'll point to other things that they assume are ancient soils, right? Paleosols are called. But I'm curious about the river channel. Is this something that they're misinterpreting and saying is a river channel, but it isn't? Or is this something that could form during the flood because it's multi-dimensional, like you're saying, with different phases going on?
Well, there were multi-phases going on. There was a lot going on. So certainly you could have events that were removing layers. As that started to dissipate, you could have had water cutting a channel that they could interpret as a river channel. I'm just speculating here.
Right.
But I don't see any reason to think that proves that the layer laid there for millions and billions of years. I think you would find you don't have plant growth there. You'd have all sorts of forests and trees growing on that top layer if it laid there for millions of years. I don't believe that's found, is it? So they find fossil graveyards, I guess you could call it. And, most fossil graveyards really point toward the global flood. You find, dead bodies, billions of creatures were killed in the flood. You find whirlpools that planted them in the same spot, and they were quickly buried by flowing sediments, which during that flow, as the flow started to dissipate, could have left some sort of a channel that could be called a river channel. I don't find anything that can't be explained by the flood because it was such a dynamic time. I would ask this fella, do you have proof that forests were growing there or in that area? And I'm pretty sure the answer is going to be no. I've never heard of forests being found growing between any of the layers. In fact, they're called time gaps. I know that the layers of Grand Canyon, which I focus on, they don't have any time gaps between. Time gaps would be plants growing on the top surface. They would have acids leaching from rocks on the top of the surface. You would have mud cracks on the top surface, only not on the surface above. So there'd be time gaps. And if you look at the Morrison Formation, but I'll just to be sure, I'll look into that before next time. But I've never heard of any forests found buried in these stratified layers.
I think they like to point to Specimen Ridge. I've heard them say, well, we've got multiple layers of fossilized forests and volcanic ash layers alternating on top of each other. And so how could you account for that in the global flood scenario? Could be a follow-up potentially to what you're saying.
Yeah, I actually Specimen Ridge only fits the global flood. I saw a pastor years ago who had gone to Fossil Ridge, it's in Yellowstone, became convinced that it proved the Earth was millions and billions of years old, and became an atheist. Well, he should have just, been listening today, because it's been proven, and a lot of this came from Mount St. Helens, Spirit Lake. Spirit Lake got filled with blown down trees, an estimated 1 million blown down trees, and some of them are still there. But as they floated along, they started a waterlog, and they'd float on the surface horizontally, but it would waterlog, and the heavier side, which is usually the root side because it's denser, would turn and float. Like if this were the surface of the water, it would float with one end sticking up, calling it upright floating log. But eventually it'd waterlog and sink to the bottom and stand on the bottom as inflowing sediments buried it. Well, they sank at different times, so the different ones would be buried in different layers. And I believe it was Steve Austin. He did some studies with regard to the trees, the tree stumps standing upright through the various, I think, 26 layers at Specimen Ridge. And it showed that they all had the same tree ring patterns of wet, dry years, forest fire years, which proved that those trees grew at the same time. And it was most likely a large lake type post-flood lake that had various logs floating on the surface. And as they turned upright and sank at various times, it looks like they grew in several forests. So Specimen Ridge, the secular view, is a forest grew and over millions of years, and a catastrophic event wiped them out. And then another forest grew and a catastrophic event wiped them out. And you have 26 different layers.
Right.
But I think the real science shows they formed in one event and sank at different times as sediments were flowing into the area.
That's a great explanation. I mean, we got a critic in the chat saying the same thing, 26, 27 layers of ash. So you're saying how they would interpret that is you have these these forests growing, and then eventually you have a catastrophic event, maybe like a volcanic eruption. So when you get the ash, more time goes by, more forests grow. But you're saying, no, this can be explained during that multi-phased flood event. Where are you saying because the trees from the flood are being redistributed and buried into essentially the subsequent layers, Russ?
Well, yeah, that's what happened, and it's happening today at Mount St. Helens. They have an estimated 55,000 trees floating upright on the bottom that have been buried in different layers of sediments.
Right.
So if you emptied the lake, you'd have the exact same thing that you've got at Specimen Ridge. So you've seen that happen in a matter of a few years. No one's ever seen that happen over millions of years.
That's a great point. Yeah. Again, it's not necessarily time, but a process. And going back to the ordering of the fossil record argument, in your presentation, you talked a little bit about coelacanth, this living fossil. I think it was even used as an index fossil at some point.
It was, yes.
It's incredible. And yet we find them over the last 100 years swimming around in our oceans today, this living fossil, largely unchanged. And so the same question that they ask, well, why don't we find dinosaurs and humans together? We can ask them the same question. Well, wait a minute. You thought coelacanth went extinct millions and millions of years ago, just completely goes missing for millions of years in the geologic rock strata, but they're swimming around today. So even according to their story, Russ, they would have to believe coelacanth coexisted with humans, coexisted with dinosaurs, coexisted with whales. Both whales and coelacanth live in the water. Why don't we find whales and coelacanth buried together? And then they're going to say, oh, well, different environments. Oh, well, wait a minute. I'm pretty sure humans and dinosaurs were probably living in different regions and environments too in the pre-flood world. So it's this double standard that I find from the evolutionists.
Well, oftentimes a double standard, if they didn't have a double standard, they wouldn't have a standard at all. So they're give them a break. They're trying to do the best they can with what little they have. Okay. But again, although we own the truth, unfortunately, they own the system. A lot of the people that you're talking about are victims of the false teachings. They've been misled, and the ones that really fight it, I sometimes wonder why they don't just look at all the science and make a better determination. But talking about the coelacanth, you go back to the geologic timescale, which is the foundation of all old Earth beliefs, including it's the foundation of Darwinism, naturalism, humanism, modern atheism, etc. All based on belief there was never a global flood. Global flood wipes all those beliefs out. But you mentioned the coelacanth being an index fossil at one time. Their index fossils are showing up alive today by the dozens. They become a total embarrassment to the older dating methods. In fact, they've had to come up with a scientific classification for them. They call them Lazarus taxon because they've risen from the dead. But the fact of the matter is, the fact that they're missing their index fossils are being found alive today totally destroys the geologic timescale. So they really got nothing. We own the truth, but they own the system.
Amen. Sam, over to you, brother.
Yeah. I mean, how much more time you have?
Well, I think we could probably start to wind down now. You know, we're almost at the 2-hour mark. But if you had a follow up or a question based on his talk, go ahead, Sam.
Well, I think I could probably wait for your next presentation, and I'm looking forward to that. I think that's going to be around a month or so.
In about a month, I think we're going to talk about the top 10 old Earth frauds or beliefs. Yeah, it should be good. And no, I first of all, I appreciate both you, Samuel. You've been in contact with me now for quite a while, trying to get something set up. And Donny, I really appreciate getting the chance to speak with you and talk to you guys on this program this evening. Thank you, guys.
Yes, sir. I do have a quick question for you, if you can. Tell us a little bit about your new book, Consider the Cost, where they can go, anyone who wants to read that book, where we can find that book. Maybe a little bit about what it is.
Thanks for asking. I've actually written about 10 books, but I don't want to have 10 books. So what I do is every time I write a book, I just condense it into a new book and a better book. So my goal has been always to have the single most comprehensive, to the point, and easily understandable book I can put together. And Consider the Cost is that. I spent 900 hours rewriting it from previous book, The Cost. Now, The Cost was used by the #1 private high school in Arizona for 11 of the last 12 years, Northwest Christian School, to make an on-campus and an online course on biblical creation that they run today. Public high school kids can actually take that online class, and it qualifies for public high school credit. It's probably the first time in 60 years anything on creation has been in any way accepted inside of a public school. But I rewrote The Cost because of the importance of operational versus historical science. I put 900 hours into it, and we just got it a couple of months ago. In fact, Northwest Christian is using it for their summer reading program this year. But it covers the difference between operational and historical science. It covers the top 10 old Earth teachings. It covers the top 10 evil fruit of old Earth beliefs. #1 being Darwinian evolution. So I cover the top 10 Darwinian teachings. And then I cover the top 10 reasons to believe in biblical creation and the global flood. It has over 300 source references. It refers to and references over 300 Bible verses. And it's a very to the point, quick, and thorough book on the creation, evolution, age of the Earth issues.
Russ, I'm looking at it right now on Amazon.com.
There we go.
And it looks like you put a lot of work into that, that's for sure. And so I want to encourage people to check that out. Consider the Cost. Russ Miller. It's been a blessing here, upholding the truth of biblical creation with you, Brother Russ. We've touched on a lot. We've gone over some of the so-called best evidence for evolution and common descent. Our next program together, we'll be able to focus on the age of the Earth and flood geology a little more, but also give our audience and critics in the audience roughly a month to gather together some objections that they might have to anything that we said here tonight, and we can continue engaging with their comments and arguments next month. Sam, thank you for being here as well, brother. Always a pleasure. Any final words, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you both for letting me spend the evening with you guys, and I love these conversations. And I would challenge any critics in the chat to consider the cost and to consider these things with a rational open mind. And yeah, that's it. Thank you again, Russ.
Well, thank you both. I enjoyed getting to spend some time with you guys, and I look forward to it again next month.
Amen. Praise the Lord. Hopefully, I know Sam and I, we've been talking, hopefully it's an in-person SFT conference one of these days where Sam is, California area. And we'll have to have you, Russ, speak there. I think that would be awesome. And so my chat mod, Doki Doki, appreciate that. Consider the cost, creationministries.org. For those in the live chat, if you enjoyed today's program and enjoyed Brother Russ Miller's presentation, I encourage you to check the description box of this video. Check out his website. He's got a lot of content. We also did a program together several years ago focusing on the flood and also the Grand Canyon, if I remember correctly. So, okay. Proverbs says, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. He that winneth souls is wise. So, Russ, you're a wise man, brother. I appreciate you doing this and giving us your time. To the audience, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. God bless you all. Standing for Truth is signing off.